Many premises across the city reopened today as the pandemic eases. Hong Kong's COVID caseload falls further to 628. And President Xi Jinping calls for countries to make COVID vaccines accessible in Boao Forum.
Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Hong Kong's stringent social distancing measures were eased somewhat today for the first time since the Omicron outbreak swept across the city. Cinemas, sports grounds, museums, gyms, and beauty and massage parlors have reopened. Christy Khan reports.
As Hong Kong's pandemic situation continues to improve, many premises have been allowed to reopen today for the first time in more than 3 months. This as the city's social distancing measures start to ease in phases. Residents will have to make sure they comply with vaccine pass requirements before entering the premises. This morning, sports fans promptly returned to basketball courts. This man said he was excited that he could play basketball with his friends once again. This man, however, said he felt suffocated exercising while wearing a face mask. Some people said it has been difficult to book sports facilities managed by the government and that there were people selling booked slots online at a higher price. Theme parks in Hong Kong reopened their doors to the public as well. Many people headed to Disneyland with their families. This boy said he was so excited about the trip that he couldn't sleep last night. This woman said she was happy that she could celebrate her birthday in the theme park. Ocean Park was similarly popular with large crowds everywhere. Visitors even had to queue for the cable cars. Cultural venues such as the M+ Museum also resumed operations. Around 20 people could be seen queuing up outside the museum before its reopening. Bernard Chan, the chairman of the M+ Museum, greeted the first batch of visitors. Cinemas were allowed to resume business after a lengthy closure, but they were not initially as busy as other premises such as restaurants. Starting today, eateries are allowed to have 4 people per table. Some restaurants said they have already received dinner bookings as the dine-out ban in the evening is lifted today. But the eased measures come with a condition. Restaurant staff are required to undergo rapid tests on a daily basis. A spokesman for this restaurant said it will provide test kits for staff temporarily but may require employees to purchase their own in the future. Christy Khan, TVB News.
After months of closures, churches and temples were reopened today.
But some worshippers who didn't have a vaccine pass had to join a mass outside. At around 8 o'clock this morning, worshippers arrived at the Hong Kong Catholic Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in mid-levels to attend Mass. Before entering, they scanned the Leave Home Safe QR code and then displayed their vaccination records. Church staff members were there to provide assistance. There were posters reminding people to adhere to social distancing. This worshipper said he's so happy to be back after the pandemic situation eased. He added after taking part in the Holy Communion, he immediately put his face mask back on. This woman said she wasn't sitting close to anyone. She added a mass wouldn't usually be crowded, so she came to the church immediately once it reopened. But this devotee, who forgot to bring her vaccination record, had a different kind of experience. She said her record is with her husband, so she may return later. The organizer raised the volume of the broadcast of the Mass so that people like her could join in outside the church. After 3 months, the Wong Tai Sin Temple opened its doors to the public again today. It had been shut down since the Lunar New Year holidays. Worshippers also scanned their QR codes, and there were designated counters on site to speed up the process of recording vaccination passes. Many, like this woman, prayed for good health. She added she had to visit the temple today, especially after having recovered from COVID. This devotee said she's been unemployed for 3 months. She had been working part-time in the catering industry, and today she prayed that everyone will have a job.
Hong Kong reported 628 new COVID infections today. That is a slight drop from yesterday. All but 25 are locally acquired. 317 cases were screened by PCR tests. 311 cases were detected by rapid antigen tests. 18 patients died in public hospitals yesterday. Passenger flights from Seoul to Hong Kong, operated by Korean Air, will be banned from landing in the city. This as some passengers did not comply with prevention and control of disease regulations. Health authorities say 250 schools have resumed half-day in-person classes. 6 schools have reported a total of 7 RAT positive cases involving 5 staff members and 2 students. The government said there is no set number of COVID infections that would trigger class suspensions.
If we detect any increase in or upsurge in cases, we will liaise with the schools to perform some investigation to see if there is any outbreak. But there is no any hard and fast threshold for class suspension. We will investigate every single outbreak individually to determine the appropriate measures.
A commentary article published by state media People's Daily said dynamic zero infection is essential if Hong Kong is to resume quarantine-free travel with the mainland. The article said Hong Kong should cherish the results of having the epidemic under control, adding the city should not be careless. The article noted the country responded to whatever Hong Kong asked for during the 5th wave of COVID outbreak, such as providing new isolation facilities and medical supplies.
The 2022 Boao Forum kicked off yesterday in Hainan Province and continues till Friday.
In his keynote speech, President Xi Jinping said the world must make COVID vaccines accessible and affordable for developing countries. Caleb Leung has details.
The theme for this year's Boao Forum is the world in COVID-19 and beyond, working together for global development and shared future. In his keynote speech delivered via video link, President Xi Jinping said a Cold War mentality could only erect the framework of global peace, while hegemonism and power politics could only jeopardize world peace. Xi also likened countries around the world to passengers aboard the same ship who share the same destiny. He said for the ship to navigate the storm and sail towards a bright future, all passengers must pull together. The thought of throwing anyone overboard is simply not acceptable, Xi added. Amid the COVID pandemic, Xi said it is essential that countries support each other, as well as improve coordination of response measures and global public health governance. The president added the world must make COVID vaccines accessible and affordable for developing countries. Xi said China will follow through with its pledged donation of 600 million and 150 million doses of vaccines to Africa and ASEAN countries respectively. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Still ahead on tonight's news, the city's jobless rate rises to 5%. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen walks out from G20 meeting in protest against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Emmanuel Macron attacked Marine Le Pen over links to Russia in debate ahead of French presidential election.
Welcome back to TVB News. Hong Kong's unemployment rate climbed to 5% in the first 3 months of the year.
That marks a 0.5 percentage point increase compared to the 3-month period from December to February. The government said Some 188,000 people were unemployed in the first 3 months of this year. That's 26,000 more than the figures in the 3-month period starting December 2021. The underemployment rate also climbed to 3.1%. A sharp increase in unemployment rate was seen in the arts, entertainment and recreation sectors. Secretary for Labor and Welfare Law Chi-kwang said with the easing pandemic situation and a boost from the government's consumption vouchers, certain sectors will see the employment situation improve.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs criticized the U.S. after Google took down Chief Executive candidate John Lee's campaign channel on YouTube. Speaking at a regular press conference, ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin complained that the U.S. government is interfering in Hong Kong affairs. Wang also claimed the U.S. is destroying free speech and fairness in cyberspace to achieve its political goals. Executive Council convener Bernard Chan believes the incident is related to disputes between China and the U.S. He added the Hong Kong government does not need to take any countermeasures.
The M+ Museum reopened today after being forced to close 3 months as a result of the pandemic, but some controversial artworks have been replaced. After the M+ reopened this morning, 2 artwork pieces that used to be on display were found to have been replaced by other paintings. That includes Wang Xingwei's New Beijing, a satirical oil painting referencing the 1989 Tiananmen protest. Chairperson of the M+ board, Bernard Chan, said he did not take part in the selection of exhibits. Still, he believes all collections at the museum will not be involved in legal issues. M+ Museum has nearly 8,000 exhibits and plans to rotate some 200 pieces during the first year of its opening. Overseas, Russian President Vladimir Putin has scrapped plans for the Russian military to storm a steel plant in the Ukrainian port city of Mariupol. Instead, he ordered a blockade of the vast facility where hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are holed up.
As the leaders of Spain and Denmark visit the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, shows report the West is racing to supply heavier weapons to counter Russia's new drive to seize the East.
For weeks, Vladimir Putin's special operation has focused devastating attention on the southern port city of Mariupol. One of the last pockets of resistance is the massive Azovstal steel plant covering some 11 square kilometers with a sprawling network of tunnels. Today on television, Putin told Defense Chief Viktor Shoigu to cancel a plan to storm the plant, saying it was no longer necessary. Shoigu said the facility is securely blocked and the rest of the city liberated, which Putin hailed as a success. Earlier, a Ukrainian commander apparently in the plant said they have hundreds of wounded and the fighters may not be able to hold out much longer. More than 2,000 Ukrainian fighters were still holed up in the plant, along with an estimated 1,000 civilians. Ultimatums by Russia to surrender have been ignored, but Kyiv has proposed swapping Russian prisoners of war for safe passage for trapped civilians and soldiers. Only 4 buses with civilians managed to escape from Mariupol after several unsuccessful attempts. Officials are trying for more attempts to evacuate. Hundreds of missile and air attacks on targets that included concentrations of troops and vehicles. Britain's defense ministry said Russia likely desires to demonstrate significant successes ahead of its annual May 9th Victory Day celebrations. With global tensions running high, Russia reported the first successful test launch of a new type of intercontinental ballistic missile. One official called it a present to NATO. The Pentagon described the test as routine, adding it wasn't considered a threat.
In a G20 meeting in Washington, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and several other finance ministers walked out as Russia's representatives started speaking in protest against Moscow's invasion of Ukraine.
The incident happened at the International Monetary Fund and World Bank spring meetings, where senior finance officials from major countries were meeting. Matthew Bray reports.
Janet Yellen and some other central bankers and finance ministers left a G20 meeting when Russia's representatives started opening their mouth. Yellen told attendees she strongly disapproved of the presence of the Russian official.
It was a very unusual break in protocol in these usually very formal, but a sign of how isolated Russia is. They were joined by some other finance ministers and central bankers, and some of the officials attending virtually turned off their cameras when the Russians spoke. So it was a real repudiation of the Russians.
Indonesian Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati, who chaired the meeting of the G20 finance officials in Washington, acknowledged the body faced unprecedented challenges.
Well, this is an extraordinary situation. It's not business as usual, a very dynamic and challenging one.
Over in Latvia, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock was telling her Baltic counterparts that Germany would phase out Russian oil imports by the end of 2022 and that gas would follow. Baerbock is one of the most hawkish members of the German cabinet on Russia, other members of the coalition less so. Pressed on Germany's tepid response on arms for Ukraine, Baerbock cryptically answered that Germany would help Kyiv maintain advanced weapons systems it might obtain from other allied countries or buy outright.
Hello.
Back in Washington, the White House was unveiling fresh sanctions on 40 individuals and entities that are accused of evading the wave of penalties imposed on Russia. They include cryptocurrency miners and TransCapital Bank. A poll conducted by the Associated Press found over half of Americans think Biden has not been tough enough in his response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And to emphasize the limits of the United Nations, its Secretary General Antonio Guterres requested by letter to meet Zelensky and Putin to discuss urgent steps to stop the fighting. It received no response from either side. Matthew Bray, TVB News.
Sparks flew between France's two presidential candidates, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, in a televised debate ahead of this Sunday's runoff election vote.
The pair debated various polarizing economic, diplomatic and social issues in a no-holds-barred exchange. Daniel Rell tells us more.
Both Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen wasted no time in pulling punches during their only head-to-head clash before Sunday's runoff ballot. Incumbent leader Macron, aiming for another 5-year term in office, was quick to latch on to Le Pen's proposal to ban Muslim women in France from wearing headscarves in public. He argued enacting such a policy would spark civil war in the country, which has the largest Muslim population in Western Europe. With the French presidential election coming amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Macron sought to play up Le Pen's alleged links to Moscow. He argued a loan that Le Pen's party received in 2014 from the first Czech Russian bank meant her hands would be tied in negotiations with the Kremlin. Macron also questioned Le Pen's voting record on various policies while raising doubts about her grasp of economic affairs. Le Pen in turn rebuffed the president's claims that she would not be in a strong position to deal with Russia. She said her party is repaying the loan, adding her party only went to the FCRB after French and other European banks refused to grant it one. On her policies, she said driving down the cost of living would be her priority should she become France's first ever female president. Le Pen added Macron's presidency had sown deep divisions in the country. She alluded to the Yellow Vest protest movement that erupted before the COVID-19 pandemic. During that time, France was awash with months of violent rallies against Macron's economic policies. Polls are suggesting that Macron is gaining a significant lead over his rival. However, the result of Sunday's runoff is predicted to be closer than the last time the two squared off in an election 5 years ago. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth II is celebrating her 96th birthday today. The Queen will spend her birthday at the Sandringham Estate in Norfolk, having kept out of the public eye since recovering from COVID-19 earlier this year. The occasion has been marked with a photograph showing the monarch with two of her ponies. The picture was commissioned by the Royal Windsor Horse Show. This year's edition of the event will celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Over 1,000 performers and 500 horses will reenact key moments in the history of the British royal family. Toymaker Mattel is also honouring the monarch's 70 years on the throne by releasing a Barbie doll collection in her likeness. That's the news. Thanks for watching.
Good night.